Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast, where faith and fishing hook up. We are here at high noon on Friday, and we have got a great guest for you today. The CEO of Bassmaster himself, Chase Anderson, is going to be on. I've had Chase speak several times at the Christian Angler meetings. When he took over Bassmaster, he brought in a whole new deal and really supports what we do, supports people coming to Christ. Just a great guy to work with, and he is going to be up next. But listen, if you haven't subscribed to our podcast yet, I want you to hit that red subscribe button. If you're listening to this just by audio on whatever podcast platform that you listen to, please give us a thumbs up, a like, and a 5-star rating. It will really help us. And also, December 17th, we're giving away a 2022 Nitro bass boat. That's right. It'll be the 5th boat I've given away. Awesome looking bass boat. You can check it out on www.chriswells.org. We'd love for you to buy a ticket and support this ministry. But coming up next, the CEO of Bassmaster, Chase Anderson, right here on the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast, where faith and fishing hook up. I have as my guest today the CEO of the Bassmasters, Chase Anderson. Chase, we are so delighted that you're joining us here on our little podcast.
Hey, Chris. Good morning. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be on. Glad to chat with you and talk to you. So thank you for inviting me.
Man, I'm so excited that you're here. You know, I call this America's slowest growing podcast. We are growing, but we're growing slowly. And so, you know, we've had a lot of fun people on the podcast, but man, we're so excited that you're here. And there's a lot of exciting things happening around Bassmaster. I know that I heard yesterday that Larry Nixon is coming back, and I couldn't be any more excited about that. Just to get a chance to shake his hand. I've actually talked to him a few times on Facebook, but we've never really, shook hands. And I'm excited about all the things that are going on at Bassmaster. But one of the things that when you came on to Bassmaster, you immediately started calling me and praying with me and supporting me. And I just tell you, man, it has just been a godsend, literally, when you came to Bassmaster. But we want to hear about your journey, not only to Bassmaster, but we want to hear about your journey to faith. And I've heard your testimony several times. We always try to get you at the classic, when we meet with the guys and everyone. I know when Chase Anderson speaks, that's going to be my biggest congregation of the year. And so I'm excited to hear your story. But tell us a little bit about your story to Bassmaster and your journey to faith. We'd love to hear it.
Sure, Chris. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I am definitely a follower of Christ first, and a businessman, and everything else comes after that. And it's a privilege to be in this role as CEO of Bass and Bassmaster, but that is not the most important thing to me. And it's been great getting to know you and your ministry and your calling, your passion for sharing the gospel in the fishing community. But yeah, for me, I grew up in a Christian home. At that time, really kind of already thought of myself as a Christian as a child. And really, it wasn't until I was in college and experimented with a lot of the ways of the world and had some really hard times when I think God really called me into an authentic, genuine relationship with Him, and that I was really able to develop a close relationship with Him and began seeking Christ first in my life. And I lived years pursuing desires and passions on my own and trying to fill a void that was definitely there. And it wasn't until I really turned to Jesus and the Lord until that was filled and I really had purpose and meaning in my life. So that's part of the history. I started fishing as a young boy for brim and catfish and on the Tennessee River in Florence, Alabama, actually on Wilson Lake. So I started fishing, but fishing's always been an important part of my life, and continued that through college, really. And then I As I got into the professional world, I left the community I built in college after I believe I became a following believer of Christ. And in the professional world, it was, difficult, but I found community where I moved and where I lived. And for several years, I actually wasn't able to fish. I was on an overseas work assignment and just traveling a lot and really missed that. But thankfully, God provided a Christian community and other believers in Christ that I could be around to support my early faith journey, if you will. But a very significant thing happened in my life, in my walk with the Lord, but also it shaped really the rest of my life up until now. Is that in early 2009, January 2009, I suffered a major brain injury, actually a major stroke that was significant. I'll tell the story briefly. This is part of this testimony you referred to earlier that I've shared with a number of anglers, number in the fishing community, and also just a number of people in the medical community and ministries that have me tell this story. And what's interesting is you introduced me as the CEO of Bass, which I am. I like to tell people this. There's a lot of people that know me more as a patient and knew my medical journey than a leader of a leading fishing organization. So that helps me keep things into perspective in my life. But on January 2nd, 2009, I went out for a jog. It's in the best health of my life. Physically was just really at peak level in my life. And there was some issues going on with my family. I was not yet married. I was a single man. I'd really put my profession first. But God had allowed me to find great community. But on that jog, I was stressed with some things and family issues. And while I was jogging, I suffered a major life-threatening stroke. And I felt a sharp pain in the right side of my head, and I lost control of the left side of my body. So right side stroke caused impairment on my left side. And as I fell down to the ground, I heard a man yell, I'm a doctor. And I was on vacation in South Florida with my family, my mother, my sisters, my brother-in-law. Said I was not yet married. And the first person that found me after I fell was a doctor. He immediately diagnosed me as having a stroke at 28 years old, best shape of my life, not a candidate for stroke, obviously, in most regards, and medically speaking. And I again was at that time really began fighting for my life. I was losing a significant amount of brain tissue and brain cells each minute that went by. Stroke is kind of a race against time in order to get care before one loses too much brain tissue. So paramedics arrived. They called paramedics. They loaded me up and took me over. And during that ride to the hospital, the first hospital, I had what I would say was an interesting encounter. I began praying, and I had not lost full consciousness, although I was incredibly sleepy or mostly out of it, if you will. But I began praying, and I just really prayed, Lord, I know you're in control. I'm one that believes in the full sovereignty of God, and He's in control of all things in all situations, and really have a reformed and covenantal theology approach, and believed in His sovereignty and did. And I began praying that, Lord, this is in your hands. There's nothing I can do here. And I began to pray for a very interesting prayer for people that they would know about this so they could pray for me, which I think was an interesting thing to pray for. I, at that time, when I prayed that, sort of had this, I don't know if I would call it a vision essentially, but it was a kind of a mental picture of just countless people bowed in prayer, praying for me. And again, one of those things that never really had before that and haven't really had since, but it obviously ministered to my heart. And they took me to the hospital. They did a X-ray, MRI, found I had a significant clot lodged in the main carotid artery in my brain that was blocking blood flow. The initial CT and MRI showed 70% of my brain was impaired and at risk of being lost permanently, which would have left me in a vegetative state as a vegetable or death, right? So those were really what the doctors were thinking my prognosis was initially. There was one doctor in that area who was performing a procedure that was not yet approved by the FDA for stroke, which is kind of the Hail Mary, the last chance to help save enough brain tissue to save my life or prevent me from being a vegetable. I was transferred to Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, Florida, where a doctor there that was one of the leadest interventional neurologists in the country had just moved to Jackson and Miami to practice there. Happened to be on call. He met me, and my mother had gotten there at that point, was signing the paperwork, and they called some other doctors trying to get recommendations. Should we do this? It's, again, device he was using was not approved by the FDA, so it was a pretty, I don't know if a Hail Mary is the right phrase, but it was kind of your one shot at saving the brain and saving my life. So Dr. Yavagal did do the procedure, removed the clot, and I was at some point within the next couple of days kind of became alert and saw my family around me. At that time, I still could not move my left side. Became more aware, but really doctors didn't think I would have any more improvement, which would have left me just a little bit above vegetative state, more kind of a locked-in syndrome, which some may have heard about from stroke survivors. But God obviously had different plans. I continued to pray during that time, and I started experiencing significant brain swelling, and the brain was swelling, and doctors were giving medication to try to prevent the swelling, and that can be life-threatening again. So I was kind of had a second round of a life-threatening situation from the stroke. During that time, I had a powerful encounter with the Lord, I believe, and again, one I'd never had before and haven't had since. I was laying on my side, and they had told my family that we really at this point don't know again. The initial image showed significant loss and that I probably wouldn't survive. I seemed to have gotten a bit better, and then the brain swelling began and put me again to a really scary place and situation. But I was laying on my side, and I was praying and singing a worship song in my head that I'd heard that previous fall 2008, called "Everything Glorious." Now I just started worshiping the Lord and thanking Him for His glory. And at that time, I actually felt what I believe was this. I just felt deflated like a balloon, and don't know exactly what it was, but it really did feel like life was kind of leaving my body. And whether that was true life or it was just being so exhausted, I'm not exactly sure. But I prayed a prayer that's a paraphrase from a paraphrase from Scripture that I recall. I prayed, God, I pray that You be glorified in all things in my life or my death. And I prayed, God, if I die today, I pray that You be glorified. And that's a paraphrase of the Scripture where Paul, it's not translated glorified, it's exalted. And the next verse, which is more well known, is to live as Christ, to die as gain. Yeah. And I'm sorry, the reference is slipping me right now. Yeah. I believe it's Philippians 1:20, but I have to go back and find that. And after I prayed that prayer, I felt strength kind of return to my body. And again, it's a little hard to describe exactly, but I felt kind of power re-enter my body, and I felt I received a strong message that Chase, you will not die today. And again, not an audible voice, but I felt a very strong message that again, I believe that was from the Lord. And then sure enough, the brain swelling started to subside, and I honestly thought, Chris, that I was healed and God had just healed me. I knew that God could do that.
Right. Yeah.
He doesn't do that a lot, but he can, and miracles do happen. And I thought that he had healed me instantaneously, like I would be back to where I was 28 years old in a professional environment, able to go run, able to fish, able to do everything I'd like to do. And kind of the amazing thing about the story is that same day, they picked me up and put me in a chair. Excuse me. To see if I could sit up on my own. Sit up. We're not talking walking. We're not talking doing anything. And I just fell right over. And I wasn't healed, right? I wasn't healed immediately. But God spared my life. And he prevented me from being a vegetable or dying with that, what showed to be 70% of the brain initially impaired. What the procedure did in the quick procedure, removing the clot that my doctor, Dr. Yavagal, did, was allow blood flow to resume and prevented 70% of the brain from being impaired. I lost brain tissue more than I wanted to, but obviously enough to survive. And the brain has an incredible way of rewiring and reconnecting and compensating for areas that are damaged. And in my case, I was blessed for that to happen. Right. Again, I think that was part of the miracle of the story. The first person that found me was a doctor, top doctor in the country, had just moved to that place. Procedure not approved by the FDA, the device they were using, all of that happened. In the other cities I had lived in previously in my life, there was not one doctor that was doing that procedure.
Wow. Yeah.
Happened to be there where Dr. Yavagal was. And we become good friends. And, after that time, there was a grueling recovery process, again, which I thought, and God could have just said, Chase, you're healed. That was a temporary, 3 or 4 or 5 day thing. It really became a 5+ year recovery process and journey, in which I couldn't walk. I couldn't make great sense of, newspapers and things I was reading before, an business article. I'm really referring to kind of business stuff now. I sure as heck couldn't cast a fishing pole or get in and out of a boat. Those things were really years away from being able to do. So I went the recovery process of intensive therapy. I was inpatient in a rehabilitation hospital after I got out of the ICU. And physically, and then also just mentally and cognitively, I had severe brain damage, which obviously affected a lot of things, the way I thought, the way I just felt emotionally, and God really allowed that to bring me to a place of real humility. Actually, I had to be bathed, I had to be completely taken care of, fed. I mean, anything one could expect of someone who nearly lost their life to a brain injury. That's where I was. I went from being in a business leadership role, doing things I love to do, to being just a patient, right? And like I said before, there's a number of people out there and people I'm still close with that's kind of more of how they see me than the guy who has the privilege of running Bass, right? And it's great, keeps things into perspective in my life. I through that journey from a rehabilitation hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, the Shepherd Center, which is an incredible facility, and we were blessed to be able to get in there. I spent some amount of time, months, recovering outpatient. I finally got back to, my mother was in Knoxville, Tennessee, town I actually grew up in. She was living there, and I lived in her basement, and I did that for about a year, and I had to relearn how to do it. And she helped me like a child again. And it was an incredible amount of humility at 28 years old, physically best shape of my life, getting business experience under my belt, a lot of new experiences at that kind of exciting stage of life. And I was basically a child again, having to relearn how to do everything. But God in his sovereignty and for whatever reason, he continued to allow me to recover and heal. And Chris, we all know people who don't have that story.
That's right. Yeah.
And they don't. And I don't know why, and I can't tell you why. You know, I have experienced the recovery that I have, and other people don't. But all I can do is be thankful and trust his sovereign plan.
Yeah.
For my life and in the lives of others as well. But you know, from a faith, a little bit deeper into faith standpoint, you know, after I experienced the powerful encounter, which I believe there were miracles involved in my recovery process, and again, at this point, the recovery was ongoing, but I really wanted to dig in deeper from a, you know, in learning about my faith and deeper in scripture, kind of from an intellectual, if you will, standpoint, or just from kind of a head in my heart as well, obviously, because it's ultimately the heart.
Right. Yeah.
But I was able to have the opportunity to take a trip to Israel a couple of years after the stroke and go to the Holy Land, which I know not everyone has that opportunity, but it was incredible to go there and really experience that and see the archaeological sites in the place where Jesus walked. And it truly is a holy place. You can just tell you're walking on holy ground. But, you know, that really helped solidify, you know, things I had learned growing up in the Word. And God really turned me to prayer and to his word. I took a year off of work to recover, so I had more time, and my brain was still recovering. But I mean, there were days, Chris, where I would spend hours in prayer, and hours in the Word, and just seeking God in the Word. I was obviously trying to seek meaning in God. Why did this happen? It was not all a rosy story of me just becoming closer to God, right? There was a lot of frustration. There was a lot of questioning. And God turned me to the Psalms in a lot of cases when I would pray and seeking him. And in the Psalms, I really saw where David cried out and seeking the Lord. And David was obviously a man of God's heart, as the word said, but also a man who struggled. But David being one that would humble himself and ask for forgiveness. And I had so many experiences like that in those first few years following the stroke, in which I would get so upset. I would have setbacks. It really was a two step forward, one step back type of approach, and realizing that it was a marathon, not a sprint, from a recovery standpoint. And I think I personally, where I was, I needed to go through that in that longer, grueling processing. And God just, you know, he ultimately allowed all of this to happen. And again, I don't know why, but I now look back on it and I'm thankful for it. I realized I needed that. You know, there were things God needed to work in my life and my heart that I didn't realize before the stroke, that in the recovery process. And again, why I didn't need to be healed right away and just go back to the way things were before. He needed to chisel away at me and teach me more about himself, and ultimately my need to depend on him and to rely on him and seek him versus just trying in myself and in my own strength. You know, I couldn't have healed myself, and I couldn't have worked hard enough, you know, just to make everything right in my life as a patient, or once I was able to start getting back to more of a life in the professional world and you know, socially. I still had not yet met my wife at this point. I ended up moving to Dallas, Texas in 2012, so well over 3 years after the stroke, and had experienced you know, most of the recovery at that point, I would say, but was, you know, still seeking things out, like, you know, counseling. God always provided things like Christian counselor, Christian brother, a pastor, someone I could turn to. Again, it did prompt a lot of questions and a lot of hard times, being patient that was just trying to recover and sort of make sense of all of it, which that's never come. And you know what? I don't think it's not going to, but you know what I believe, Chris, what God wants, and I think he wants it for all followers of Christ, is for us to turn to him and depend on him.
Yeah.
And it ultimately to see it's him that's carrying us and directing us. And again, it gets into in learning this, I developed much more of a strong belief in the complete sovereignty of God. And I've come from more of a reformed background from a theology standpoint, and really that's where my experience only led me into that more, and a kind of a covenantal theology perspective as well, if you will. And over the years, I've again really tried to pursue Christ in his word and in prayer and in community. And I've been so thankful that he's been able to put great Christian brothers around me. And that's been such a blessing. But in 2012 in Dallas, I met my wife, and I'm so blessed. She is a sold out believer and really encourages me to keep the Lord first in my life and in my life journey. And God's used Ashley in so many ways in my life. And then in 2017, I'm from an old family business, over 100-year-old family business. We knew the previous ownership group of Bass. We had the opportunity to acquire Bass, and I grew up fishing as a kid. As I said, I joined Bass as a young man, or I was probably 10 or 12 years old, I guess. I started brim fishing, catfishing, got into doing a little bass fishing, found out about the world's largest fishing organization, BASS Bass, and then joined it and started getting Bassmaster magazine. And that, of course, was before the days of websites and
I've got them all.
And all those. Right. But just that really helped cultivate my interest and passion and love for bass fishing. And that was always with me in the back of my mind, and led all the way to the previous ownership group of Bass, led by Don Logan. I've become a family friend many years ago. And when I was a college student at Auburn, I used to go fish with Don, actually. And we stayed in touch over the years. And in 2017, we had the opportunity, our family, to acquire the company. And I moved to Birmingham and worked with the team here. And it's just a real privilege to work in an industry and around a sport that I'm passionate about. I really I love the outdoors. I love to fish. I'm more of a recreational angler. I personally have not been a tournament angler. I obviously like the tournament side of it, to follow it as a fan even, and to learn about it and the ways guys approach tournament fishing. It's fascinating to me. At some point in my life, maybe I'll get into fishing a few tournaments. I don't.
You'll save a lot of money if you don't.
Yeah, I don't have the time or the between work and a family, young family. But
well, man, I tell you, one of the things you said, talking about when you're going and you're questioning, and I've heard Rick Warren say before that God is more interested in my character than he is my comfort. And I always think about that too. Even with passing of my wife and all the things that we've gone through this year, that God is continually trying to shape my character and to make me into what he wants me to be, not necessarily what I think that he should make me be. And so, man, I appreciate your humility. I appreciate everything. I do want to ask you this. What's your favorite lure? What's your favorite way to catch them when you go bass fishing? What do you like to do? Our viewers like to hear a little fishing tips and stuff like that. So tell us what Chase Anderson's favorite way to catch them is.
Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of tips. I like throwing crankbaits.
Okay. Yeah.
I like throwing crankbaits. And
are you a deep crankbait guy or a shallow crankbait guy, or do you?
Yeah, probably more shallow.
Shallow. Yeah.
I love topwater fishing or I like throwing a chatterbait. A good bit. We fish on Lake Martin some. It's not hour and a half from Birmingham, and Logan Martin's pretty close to Birmingham here, where we're based. And again, I don't get to fish as much as I would like to. I've got 2 young daughters, and take up a lot of my weekend time, of course, and stay pretty busy with the role here at work. But I love to fish. I get out when I can, and go with guys from work when I can, or on some trips I take. But
man, it's a lot of fun. It really is. And I know that, when you came in, you started the prayer groups with Bass, and, I still get prayer requests from people at Bass, and we get a chance to pray for one another. And, the team that Bass has built is just a marvelous group of people. So much fun. I just love it when I get there. Everybody's so friendly, and everybody, from the top to the bottom, everybody's, a big family. And I really, feel that, and I appreciate, being a small part of what we do, at Bassmaster. But man, I want to thank you so much for having me. Having you on here, for coming on for my podcast.
Listen,
good night.
Chris, I'm thankful for you personally, and we're thankful for you serving as a chaplain on the Elite Series, and you're there, and it's great. You're there for the Elite Series anglers, for their families, and I see that, and I've enjoyed attending some of your meetings, and I know your passion for the gospel and for bass fishermen and outdoorsmen, in this country, and you genuinely want to see more come to Christ and serve them and walk along them in their journey with the Lord, and I'm just happy to have the chance to know you and get to work with you, and but really support what you're doing, and thank you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it so much. I'm very humbled by that. And I'm very, very blessed to be a part, and I love what we do. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap us up for this week. If you got any questions, and listen, if you've never joined Bassmaster, you need to get on it right now. You need to go to bassmaster.com, and it'll be one of the best bass fishing decisions you've ever made in your life. And follow us along on the Bassmaster Elite Series this year. It's going to be a great, great season. But this is the podcast where faith and fishing hook up, and we will see you next time.